for the past 10 years, in various forms, I've been engaged in environmental activism. And this has meant that I've done direct action, I've met with politicians, I've written countless submissions, and I've given public lectures. Now, during this time, the most frequent question which I've been asked is, do we have enough time to avert the environmental crisis? Or have we passed a series of tipping points? In response to this question, I think it's really important to consider who occupies the position of we in that question. So, does we include the millions of environmental refugees who were displaced from their homes just last year, the majority of whom were women and children? Or does we include fatalities from storms or from droughts or heat waves? Or perhaps, does we include the thousands of species that go extinct every year? Oops. Seen through this lens, the question, do we have enough time, is clearly misguided. And I think if we can expand our moral compass to include people from the majority world and perhaps other species as well, it's clear that we ran out of time some time ago. And I think it's really important that when we talk about the environmental crisis, that we give it that present tense and that we honour those that have suffered or who are suffering. I think that's a vital starting position. Understanding what is at the root, what is driving the environmental crisis, I think is absolutely integral to how we might go about responding. American scientist Jared Diamond wrote a book called Collapse, which has been both venerated and criticised. But one of his important points that I want to draw on is one of his findings that past societies who have collapsed, who have gone extinct, were actually acutely aware of the condition that was leading to their demise. They had some awareness of it. But, Diamond argues, they were unable to let go of long-held values that no longer supported their society, that no longer put them in a positive frame. So, what might such views look like for us today? In the time that I have, I just want to talk about two. The first is anthropocentrism, or extreme human-centeredness. Albert Einstein defined anthropocentrism as an optical delusion of human consciousness, whereby we come to regard ourselves as the centre of existence. Now, this idea has very deep cultural resonance. And I think the most classic example is in the biblical book of Genesis, where you have God granting dominion to human beings over nature and to use things for his own needs. Now, there's also an explicit responsibility ethic in the Christian gospel, but the way this idea has been developed is that nature is human property. It's ours to use, exploit, and perhaps even destroy. The second idea is economic growth, and this is the equally deluded idea that our economies should grow by about 2.5% compound growth forever. In periods of historical abundance, such growth would not have been considered a problem. But today, we live in an age of scarcity and resource wars. And we've not only reached the limits of growth, we've smashed through them, both environmentally and socially. And it's in this very specific context that I think David Suzuki has it right when he says conventional economics, so growth forever, is a form of brain damage. Now, law is a social institution. It's a cultural organisation, and it's been fundamentally shaped by these two ideas, anthropocentrism and growth. This shaping has a long history, but it really intensified during the Industrial Revolution. And during this period, corporate bodies or industries demanded the right to interact with nature in a more intense way, to take more from the soil, to draw more water, to pollute into the air. To facilitate this, corporate bodies played an active or perhaps an activist role in shaping laws to promote their growth. Now, of course, such influence didn't end there, and it continues today. And I think one of the most interesting recent examples has been the recent push by the Business Council of Australia to abolish or to reduce so-called green tape because of their belief that environmental laws are so onerous on them. However, despite the rhetoric from groups like the Business Council, it is also clear that environmental laws have not fundamentally changed the game or stopped environmental exploitation. Professor Ian Lowe makes this point as follows. He says, despite the awareness of 35 years of environmental awareness and environmental law, environmental systems and indicators are all worsening. So at best, environmental law is merely slowing the rate of degradation. Wild law is a vision for radically reconfiguring our legal system so that it supports and protects the environment. Its starting point is the following question. What would our legal system look like if it recognised ecological limits as opposed to the growth paradigm and saw human beings as fundamentally connected and dependent on the environment? Now, we're not prescriptive about the kinds of laws that we might see, but here are some suggestions. We always talk about property in terms of what it gives us, rights, things it enables us to do. But what if property also came coupled with responsibilities, duties to the environment, obligations to future generations? Now that might sound radical, but it's actually already codified in the German Constitution. Article 14.2 says that property comes coupled with obligations. Nature's intrinsic value is another idea. And this is the idea that nature has value that doesn't depend upon human beings. Again, we already have this in some legal systems, in Germany, in Austria, and in Switzerland. And more radically, perhaps, the idea that nature has rights. So a river, for example, can have rights, and groups of people can sue to protect those rights. Already, 30 municipalities and cities in the United States have recognised this. It's in the Constitution of Ecuador, and a river in New Zealand last year was accorded personhood and rights as well. Alongside this idea, or these ideas for a future legal system, is the transition question. How do we get there? Or more accurately, how do we support the vast amount of energy that is already going into transition? And here I identify as a lawyer who refuses to place all of my hope in the law and in government institutions, which I think have become far too close to moneyed interest in recent times. What inspires me today and gives me hope is not lawyers necessarily, it's people, community groups and grassroots activists who aren't waiting for government to make the changes for them. In Adelaide, in our city, I'm particularly inspired by the Transition Towns movement, those implementing local economies, people that teach permaculture to children or set up community gardens, or who try to build community resilience in whatever capacity they can. Now, such examples are perhaps a far cry from how we normally think about legal change, but I think they're fundamental to it. Because when change comes from below, it means that groups of people have come together to work for common solutions. It means that they have ownership of the idea. It's not something that gets passed down to them. And it means that they've had the ability to take part in democratic processes and a confidence that you can only realise from political victory, and that can ensure that they can play an ongoing role in governance. So to conclude, as we move into an uncertain future, I would like to encourage you to place your hope in each other. While it's not often recorded in the history books, all of the significant advancements from the suffragettes to the civil rights movement have come about by ordinary people like you and me who come together and they do extraordinary things. And I see absolutely no reason why the key to protecting the environment shouldn't also come through people or from us. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the organisers as well. Thank you.